This is 180 milliseconds too late. The SSA Rocket League podcast. And we've just had the last regional of the winter split. And we're at the beginning of a long, dry spell of 10 weeks before the next split. The spring split starts, the final before Worlds. And of course, we have to talk about the regional that just passed, all the highs and lows. And who better to talk about it than our people from the Stats Corner, Jota and Achunl. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello, it's good to be here.
So we're going to have like a little bit of an extended, a little bit more chilled of a Stats Corner here, because there must be amazing things that came out of the weekend. But before we get there, we got to know a little. Jota, I know you from Uni Rocketeers as a caster. The first time I met you, we cast together. That must have been about 7-8 months ago now. And then Joe, I met you for the first time when you arrived at Stats Corner. So let's start with you. What do you, other than do stats stuff, what do you do?
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I started out casting in the Rocket League scene, and then I've gradually run away from my microphone, and now I'm the stats manager for Uni Rocketeers. So I sort of help out there where I can, and in my usual time, I am training to become a teacher.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you actually have a legitimate real life activity.
You might say that.
And Joe, and where are you from? I mean, clearly you're English, but where do you reside? Where's home?
In the beautiful island of Jersey, Greybeard. A big place with a fairly big South African community, actually.
Really? Part of the part of our refugees that we're sending to all parts of Europe and parts of Australia as well. All right, And then Jota, tell us about you. From whence do you hail and what do you do?
I'm not sure I'm quite as exciting, to be honest. I come from the southwest, and I'm at the University of Birmingham studying mathematics, and I play a lot of University Rocket League. I cast a lot of University Rocket League. I cast whoever else will take me. Knocking from door to door and turn up on whatever Twitch channels, and that's what I do most of the time. I occasionally study a bit, but there's a lot of casting in there. And
studying mathematics, that sounds like a solid profession for Rocket League statistics, amongst other things. Well, that's plenty exciting, Jota. So you were seconded into doing the stats for the SSA regional. So let's get into talking about the weekend, the regional that just passed. And let's start with you and your overall impressions of the regional, your takeaways, and then we'll dive into some of the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously just so many things that you can look at. It's such an interesting region because, it's impossible, I think. It's sort of human nature. You look at something and you're making fairly instantaneous judgments about the nature of things, aren't you? So, I turn up for the first regional and I sort of say, oh, well, what's happened, before? Obviously, I'm turning up at the start of the second split of the RLCS. And everyone says to me, well, Pirates have won everything. So I go, okay, that's fine. So instantly in my head, then I'm framing it as well. Who's going to come second? It's sort of locked in my head. But then I learned that lesson quite quickly, that perhaps it's never so easy. And that's part of the reason I love doing the stats, because you can find reasons for some things, but then other things just always defy explanation.
All right. And your thoughts, Jota?
So the first time I ever came onto SSA, you may or may not be aware that so all the viewers who've watched a lot of it will know that we've had Stats Corner Regional 2 and 3, but in Regional 1 we still had the stats people behind the scenes, just not on camera. And I came in to cover a day that a channel couldn't do, and that was the Championship Sunday of Regional 1. And he said to me at DMs, basically, before you start doing your research, Pirates are going to go win it and probably stomp everyone. And I was like, right, got it. And then messaged him at the end of the day and said, so about that Pirates stomping you've got there. But you got to give them credit. They have bounced back really well. I'm tempted to say that in Regional 3, they probably looked better than they were all split.
No, I'm inclined to agree with you there. My impressions of them from Friday night is they looked very determined. Like they'd been practicing things and they wanted to get out there and do what they'd been grinding to do, and there was it seemed very little fuss. They had blips and moments where they looked a little like where their plans and formations, as the best laid plans often do, kind of fell apart a little bit. But outside of that, for the most part, in the main, they were looking pretty solid from the beginning. So, okay, well, I don't know which one of you wants to go. I know your heads have been swimming all weekend with the numbers and stats, looking at individual series and the head-to-head between teams and what each individual team has done. But I don't know if there are any sort of overall numbers that were kind of either strange, interesting, or worth looking at that might explain what came out of the weekend.
I mean, we found, obviously, stats it's one of those never-ending cycles, isn't it? Like you could find enough numbers to fill a bath with, I think, in here. But one thing that Jota and I were finding consistently interesting is just, especially, we see one of the main things we're looking at this regional, and it's such a shame for the region as a whole, but we kept looking at, forfeit losses due to load shedding, power outages, things like that. And it's such a shame for the teams involved. We've also seen sort of on an individual level a lot of substitutes swapping in for individual games or series or things like that, which perhaps you don't see as often in other regions. And it makes it very interesting to do the stats, because we end up looking at things and, we have to sort of take these calls over whether or not it's worth using a stat. Because, say, for example, if I look at the overall score leaderboard, which is, something vaguely useful, and then you look at someone who's like 5BS is in second place from Evolved because he played 3 games in the group stage of Regional 2. And so you end up with all of these sort of strange numbers like that. And, all the top 3 players who've got the most assists per game have all played 5 games or less. So you end up with these really weird numbers that just don't sort of really reflect what goes on. But it's always interesting to find out the reasons sort of behind those anomalies.
Okay, and then Jota, I know it's very easy to get lost in stats, and Rocket League is one of those games that can provide a bunch of stats. If you've got the access to the right things, there's all sorts of amazing things like the heat maps and the boost usage and how many pads were collected, how many big boosts were collected, how fast people were, how slow they were, how much time they spent in this half, that half, and you can almost sort of lose lose the forest from the trees in terms of what it all means. Now, from your point of view, what are important stats that actually impact an outcome of a series, of a tournament?
It's one of those that I would love there to be one answer to that, because wow, that would make our job so easy if we could just write some of the stats off and say these ones aren't important. But it's really all about how they mesh together, and it needs to be consistent themes as well, because if you find a player who in group stages got a ton of demos against weaker teams, but then as soon as they start playing good teams, their demo count goes down, which is something we see very often, then you can't really point to it honestly and say, oh, that's what's going to make them win, because you know that when they come up against top opposition, they're not going to be able to do it. So it's all about linking them together and creating that narrative for us as our job.
Okay.
That is, I think, the key challenge, really.
All right. Well, let's look at some specifics then. If we throughout, in many ways, the weekend turned out according to plan. If we look at who came in top 4, I don't think anyone is massively surprised by how that turned out. But Royalty, I don't know, they are a team that kind of shook up the top 4, because we had a very clear top 4 until Royalty showed up at the beginning of this split, and suddenly they've become a proper contender. So I don't know if there's anything particularly interesting coming out of that team from a statistical point of view.
We could talk about Royalty for hours, Graby, and frankly, why can't we? Are you okay with this podcast just going on forever? Can this just become the Royalty show?
I'll try and make it just shy of forever. I'll try and rein it in as much as possible, but let's go.
Okay, so I mean, when we talk Royalty, I'm going to start where I always start with these things, which is the demos. They are super violent, and the thing is that this goes back to when we were talking about which stats are useful and which ones impact the game, and demos is one of those that sometimes you can get demos that don't mean a lot to the flow of the game. If you demo someone who is in the wrong half of the pitch, you've basically rotated them back for free. And that's why we did various things, and we looked at the timelines of the games to try and understand which demos mattered or not. And when it came to Royalty, we found tons of goals where they were getting demos within 10 seconds of the goal being scored, good offensive demos that made a huge difference. And that is the number one thing on the list of Royalty. And then the number two, I think a lot of SSA people could probably guess where I'll go with this next. I'm going to go for Eliakim as that key man. And he really has put up a huge performance all split. I think I saw him today retweeting the Octane GG stats where he was top 10 in every single category that they tweeted about, which is just an insane flex. But the other thing, Aj, if you want to add a bit more, is that I think we've seen them change over the split as well, haven't we?
We have. I will chat about that in just 1 second. I do want to talk a little bit though, because you say about, Royalty, and we were looking into their demos, and these are the kind of things that quite often, this is why we love working with such a wide range of casters, because occasionally they'll come to us with these types of question, and so we'll say, oh, these guys have got X amount of demos per game, and you go, oh, well, great, that's probably good for them. But as Jota said, sometimes these demos are probably helping the other team rather than hindering them. And it's just these offhand sort of questions from our casters. So I think it might have been Muzz. He says to us, how many of them do you reckon are useful? And we go, what? Like, how are we? But the problem is, because we're nerdy enough to be in Stats Corner to begin with, our brains don't just go, absolutely no chance we're not answering that because it's going to be far too much work. We go, oh, now I want to know. So then you have to come up with an idea of what usefulness is. So we say, oh, it's got to be within 10 seconds of the goal. And then you look it up, and Royalty were incredibly impressive with those demos, making use out of them actually scoring. Until, like Jota said, until Regional 3, because then they had to play with sub. Obviously, Original comes in, and they completely change up their play style. I was actually probably one of the most interesting conversions I've watched of a single player, because Eliakim suddenly becomes, he goes from being your Miroslav closer type out-and-out striker, scoring goals from the 6-yard line every time, and then he suddenly becomes, an Andrea Pirlo. He's playmaking in the midfield. He's doing all sorts of things to help the rotation. And suddenly that's his focus. And he was topping assists charts for day 1 and day 2 of the regional last weekend. So Original then left, perhaps the easiest place to slot in up front, where you're scoring all those goals and making all the changes up there. He's doing an amazing job there. And I think actually it's something that they should, consider. Obviously, they probably won't be playing necessarily with Original again, a substitute player. But the play style they adopted, I think probably matched them up quite a lot better against those top teams last weekend.
That is remarkable, and that was casters. Well, let me speak for myself, because there's so much immediacy in what you're watching and calling that it's very easy to lose the big picture. But even it was very clear to me that he was playing that role and did it magnificently, particularly Friday night, where Original, coming in as a sub, had an absolute blowout as a player. It scored out, probably the top goal scorer of the night for the group stages. Yeah. All right. So is there anything else about Royalty before we move on? Because there are a couple of other matchups and teams I want to ask about.
I think it is just going to be interesting now, from my point of view, to see what they do, because it's in many ways it's great for them, but in some ways I think it's actually going to be quite tricky to navigate, because obviously, they've had to then come in with this substitute player, which, teams do that. And, I was talking about it earlier, especially in SSA, it's something we see quite commonly, unfortunately. And that's unlikely to change. But usually it's then a distinct difference in play that doesn't benefit a team. But now Royalty have come out in Regional 3, and I think, maybe not objectively played better, but arguably I think they have put out a better performance. Whether that's down to the sub or not, you can never tell. But it then creates that little sort of seed of doubt, doesn't it, as to whether, if they then go back to their main roster, do they go back to their main play style? Was that the change? Is that what's helped them come to that sort of top level and really take some good games off teams that are, previously out of their reach? It's going to be quite interesting to see what kind of Royalty we get come the spring split, because there's such a long gap in between to try and sort of, if they wanted to, change things up.
All right, and then let's talk about Bravado 80K, which are, two teams that have played each other a lot throughout the regionals and the splits. They met in the upper semi-finals. ATK had a blinder in the second regional, taking down Bravado and giving Pirates a bit of a run. But this time, Bravado on top. And I don't know statistically if there are any clear areas where they might have differed or where my Bravado might have had the upper hand, taking that down 4-2.
This is such a tough one, and it's such an important one, of course, for the region as well, because they're still very close to each other in RLCS points, and the two teams very clearly fighting for second and third now. I think that it's fair to say that they've dropped the rest of the pack, and as you said, they played each other a lot of times. This split, that was 7 times.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, no, overall, that's 7 times, including fall. And that's 5-2 in Bravado's favour, but there's this weird thing where Bravado beat them 3 times in a row, and then they turn around in Winter Regional 2. They beat them twice back to back the other way. ATK took them down 4-3 and then 4-2, and then straight back Winter Event 3. Couple weeks later, Bravado win twice 4-2. But I think probably the best way to just describe it is that all those games are coin tosses, and when you toss a coin 7 times, you don't know which way it's going to go. Sometimes it will be a 4-2.
And then, okay, well, now let's talk about the regional champions, Orlando Pirates, who've won everything except one regional. I don't know if there's any clear delving into the stats. Is there like an obvious reason, or is it a combination of things that are sort of making them consistently above everyone else?
It's a thing that I think, because it's very easy for us, we'll sort of peel back the curtain a bit, perhaps. Quite often we'll have very, very scarily, in fact, similar ideas about, why things are a certain way. But sometimes we do disagree. And Pirates are one of those teams that we just haven't really, we've got a few ideas. And, I think it's going to be some combination of all of them. But it's one of those that, you just have to watch them almost in perpetuity. You just have to keep watching them and watching them. The main thing that we found, Taylor, is just sort of sitting back. They play so differently from everyone else in that kind of positional aspect that it must have something to do with it, but sort of describing exactly what is a little bit challenging.
It's one of those things where you want to say, oh well, other teams should just sit back then, and they're clearly going to be as good as Pirates, but you know that is just never going to be the case. Yeah. So it's definitely a combination of their raw speed and ability, their game sense, and everything. But yeah, as Aj says, I think that it's harsh to say that is the one thing, because we can find them up there in the top 5 for basically every metric.
Yeah,
and
that's mechanical.
Assists per player as well is one of those that they have 2 players right up there at the top, Snowy and Darth. I mean, we talked about it before that the top 3 all have less than 5 games, so you can basically discount those. And then when you do, Snowy and Darth are 2nd and 3rd out of everyone, so they also find each other a lot. But they found something that works for them, and it's very patient Rocket League, and it can be brutal to watch when they just sit back, wait for a team to push forward at them, and then slice them open in the gaps.
And are there players, like standout players, if you look at the entire field, and look at who are the standout players for you? You've mentioned Eli Kim, and obviously you're more than welcome to mention him again. Who are those for you? I don't know if you have a top 5 or whatever, but whatever. Just thinking about the regionals you've been involved with, who are the standout players?
This is hard, so I want to let Atch answer this one first.
All right, Atch, you're first. The baton's been passed to you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm in at the deep end. It's an interesting one, and one that I could become very quickly very boring with, because it's you sort of say, oh well, obviously all 3 of the Pirates are incredible players. We're talking about their raw mechanics, their speed, their ability. They'll come near the top of the leaderboards for quite a lot of different stats. But I'm almost inclined to lean a bit towards people who are doing loads for their team, and then even if their team is not necessarily placing particularly well, if they're doing really well, I sort of gravitate towards them as that sort of individual standout role. Because I think Pirates are just good together, and if you put all of them, if you sort of scattered them across the other top teams in the region, I couldn't tell you. I'm sure they would do fine, but I couldn't tell you if they do as well as they did. Whereas these guys, players like Panda and Mr Lowe, PWB Bot Gaming, sort of mid-tier regional teams, they're doing fine, but they're not pushing for top 4, things like that. But they're first and third in the score charts. They're doing so well. Across 3 regionals, Panda's shot 32%. That's, as much as you can ask from someone, really, especially the way PWB play. And he's got 460 points a game over nearly 50 games. It's just a huge sort of thing like that. So I think I always, something I have to catch myself on, I think, because I lean towards those sort of underdog roles, the players who do really well for the little team. And I love them, and I think they play really well. Panda in particular, I love his play style because he's just so close to the ball that I never think it should work, and it always does.
And what do you think that means? Because I think that's an important thing to look at, but I don't know why. Where you have someone like PWB or Bot Gaming, does it mean someone like Mr Lowe does it lean toward a roster change, or does it lead to they need to think about themselves more as a team and grind that? There's meaning in this, and I don't know where your thoughts lean with regard to that.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I fully expect in many ways that Taylor will just disagree with me in 5 minutes, which is perfectly fine, because I don't think there is a correct answer. And I would say, actually, I might argue that for PWB, I think they're doing perfectly fine the way they are. And Panda's on top because he's getting these fantastic, chances made and defensive rotations done by his teammates. And he's obviously contributing a lot in all areas, but they've clearly worked very well together as a team on that chemistry. They assist so many of their goals that I think, that's sort of not an issue that he's ended up on top. If that, I think it would almost be stifling him to suggest that they tried to play a bit more evenly. Whereas for someone like Mr. Lowe, I'm not sure, because the rest of his teammates are, if anything, even further sort of down a lot of these leaderboards. And I wouldn't want to say, because, you can never say. I don't know what these players, how they communicate, what they do. Maybe Mr. Lowe's decided he's going to be that sort of all singing, all dancing frontsman who scores all the goals, and his teammates help him out. Maybe he goes to another team and they don't want to do that for him, and he just sort of fades down the leaderboards. It's so hard to say.
Fair enough. All right, well, Jota, now that Atch has had a long crack at it, have you got some thoughts in order in terms of who your standout players are?
I wanna take a little bit of echoing Atch's sentiments before I take a crack, because I've been looking at it just now, and Panda is in the top 10 comfortably for shots taken per game. He's taking over 3 a game. None of his teammates are in the top 20, so he is getting a lot of service, is the thing, right? You're talking about, is a player scoring all the points? Does that mean that the team is bad? But when you're getting as many shots as the top teams, who, let's be honest, they're going to be padding those stats in groups as well, those other teams.
Yeah.
So when you're up there and you're not a top team, that means that you're getting tons of service to you. So I think that Panda's really just getting a lot of the ball and doing a lot with it. And you can't discredit the work of his teammates giving him a lot of the ball. And yeah, as Aj says, it's very easy to bias towards those players doing good things. And there are going to be a lot of quiet players in the region that I will be massively underestimating. But the problem is that when I pick my favourites here, I can't know which one of those quiet players are actually extremely reliable, because you just can't tell unless you watch all the replays individually from that player's perspective. And we don't have enough hours in the day to all sit there and watch all the replays from everyone's perspective. We can only watch them once or twice through. And that means that I'm going to have to play relatively safe with my picks. I think that I'm going to give you a top 5.
Okay.
And I'm going to avoid putting them in order for safety reasons.
Okay.
I don't dare try and order these. But in my top 5, I'm going to have to put Panda, who, again, we talked about, massive regional. Elia Kim, I've said plenty about him. He takes a lot of boost from his teammates, and then he does a lot with it. And then I feel like this list wouldn't be right without a bravado player. And therefore, To Die For has to be in the list. And suddenly I've only got 2 spots left, and I feel like they both have to be Pirates players.
Okay.
I'm struggling to pick my 2 Pirates players. I'm probably Snowy's the first one in. That's more comfortable. And then Skill Steal and Darth, I don't know which way to choose them round. Really could be either of them, but probably leading to Darth on the back of this regional to lock out my 5.
All right, and it's an interesting combo, that Darth and Skill Steal, because Darth has they both have moments of brilliance, but Darth, for me, kind of leans toward the sort of aggressive mechanical player, and Skill Steal more sort of from the back, a little more defensive, then comes out with unbelievable plays. So they both have those incredible moments, but from slightly different points of view or position or thought process.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. And the thing with Rocket League versus, of course, a game like football where you've got a lot of players in rigid positions is that the lines between what a position is in Rocket League is so much more blurred that when we're trying to compare players, you have to be like, I don't know if this striker is better or worse than this defender, and it makes it so hard to compare. But that is the joy and the difficulty of our jobs, really.
Yeah, and look, and there's always danger in sort of prioritizing certain stats over others because you don't then. So if you pick your player and you say Pirates won because of Darth or Snowy or Skill Steal, it completely negates the value of how they work together and how one feeds the other, how one defends off the other, and so on. So I completely get you. The stats should give a story, should give the story scope and depth and breadth rather than this is the reason why.
I could not agree more.
Yeah, I again was just about to echo that exact sentiment. I mean, and the thing is, it's harsh because, you know, for us, what we want to, you know, to make our job easier and make ourselves look better, what we want to say is, here's 3 numbers that tell you everything you need to know, and they will be a foolproof predictor of what's going to happen. But then at the same time, if that was true, it wouldn't be fun. No one would watch because we'd just turn up on Stats Corner and go, well, they're going to win because they take more shots. And then they'd win and everyone would go, well, you said they'd win and they won. So it's, you know, it's such a hard balance to strike between you want to be right and giving useful information, but at the same time, you know that, you know, odds are a good, you know, quarter of your information at least is just going to turn out to be wrong because otherwise you'd never have any upsets.
Well, according to the data, Pirates takes this one 4-2 by, you know, 3 goals in the first game, 2-1 in the second, and and then why play? Just take the stats and move to the next game in the bracket.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, I'd like to now close it off talking about Stats Corner as a segment. Statisticians have been part of competitive Rocket League for some time now, and they play a fantastic role, often an overlooked role, because I know I've been terribly guilty of stats people who've worked really hard to put together incredible live stats, and then I completely forget to check them. And there are some really, you know, in-depth stuff there that just gets ignored because of it. So what are your impressions, and keeping in mind that there will be a little bit of bias because the two of you were Stats Corner, but Jota, will start with you. What are your thoughts on this as a segment, and not just for our regionals? Is this something that should be exported to other areas and other competitions?
Look, when Ash described it like weather forecasters during a broadcast, I think that really is the perfect sort of description because that is basically the job. You're looking at the forecast and you've got the data, you've run the simulations, but ultimately sometimes it's not going to be the weather that you think it is. And that's sort of the disclaimer that we always have to provide. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I do genuinely expect a lot of people to want to implement because it takes complicated areas of the game. Well, when Stats Corner is working at its best, we're able to take quite complicated areas of the game and deliver them to an audience who haven't analyzed these replays, who maybe aren't experts rotationally, but we can break down the numbers and give them a story and turn quite complicated ideas into relatively simple couple of second overviews. And I think it really brings high level Rocket League to a wider audience.
Awesome. And Atch, your thoughts on Stats Corner as an ongoing segment?
Yeah, I think I'd love to see it carry on. I mean, you know, for me, you know, it seems like a pretty sort of natural extension of teaching. You know, I feel like I'm sort of giving over, like Taylor says, that story, helping people sort of understand something. And it's, you know, like you say, it's so easy to especially because we're the two people on it, we're going to say, yeah, it's great. If anyone else wants to do Stats Corner, come and give us
We're available.
Yeah, exactly. But
We are,
at the
by the
same
way.
time,
Please.
let's be clear, that is true.
Follow me on Twitter.
That is true. That is true. But at the same time, like, with the best will in the world, we're not going to do every Rocket League competition there was. And I would still be really happy to see it implemented somewhere else in general. I think it's just a great way because, like, I find, like, doing a one-man stats job is fine. It's perfectly good and it's a good way to do the work and you get things. And you're saying, we're not expecting the casters to use all of these stats because at the same, they're casters and it's great when they do, and that's what we're here for, to sort of help them. But if they just sort of stopped every time we posted a stat and went, oh, we've got a stat, this is what we've got, it would feel completely sort of disjunct and out of sorts. So that's never the expectation, but at the same time, like you say, it is at times, a little bit disappointing when you sort of find this really interesting little tidbit of information that they just never find a way to work in because it's not what they're talking about. It's not their fault, but you still look at it and you go, oh, what? That was quite cool, I thought. And so Stats Corner sort of, it merges that. It makes sort of best of both worlds where there are two of us on the thing, so we get to come up with some really in-depth stats that one of us just couldn't do on our own in that same time frame. But B, then it's a great way to sort of link it with the casters, and they can say, I'd love to chat to them about that, and we sort of do our stats, live on stream as well for the casters when they ask us things. But it doesn't then create any pressure on anyone, really, us or them, to produce a certain amount of content out at any given time. We just round up what's left in our sort of stats segment, and then hopefully everyone's learned something.
Yeah, I don't have to fill my nugget per minute quota. All right. Well, in closing, I'll tell you what I, as a caster and as a fan of Rocket League, really appreciate about it. Rocket League, at its base, is a very accessible game. If you know nothing about it, there's an orange team, a blue team, and each is going for the other's goal. So you can start watching it immediately. But even that, for the first time at the high level, it's so fast paced. And I do have to say, what's confusing about it is in football, when you watch football on TV, the cameras are all on one side of the field. So orange team is left to right and blue team is right to left. Whereas Rocket League, you're getting POVs, you're getting this side, that angle, and as a player, more than once I've shot for my own goal because I got confused. I'll say it happened a long time ago, but so at its base, it's accessible. But as you watch it more, you start to appreciate the depth of it. The mechanical ability, the shots, the flip resets, the musties off the ceiling, the fakes, all of the terminology, and what you guys have brought to it is it's just more. Another way to make the game more accessible, and you made a perfect analogy at the teaching element of it, because as you listen to the stats, as a newcomer to the game, I might not understand everything you're saying, but I start to look, there are boost pads. I guaranteed people watching the game for the first time don't know the difference between a boost pad and a canister, but between the casters, the stats, all of that, it starts to add to that knowledge, and it makes people appreciate the depth of this game, which makes it wonderful. It is so mechanical. It has so much depth to it. And I think the two of you have brought an amazing dimension to the game, and that is a segment as well. And I think you guys did a superb job. So, Jota and Achunl, thank you very much for taking some time out and giving us an in-depth look at Stats Corner, not just a brief 2-minute segment where we could kind of talk about some interesting stuff. And I hope, there's a long way to the next split, but I really, really hope you guys will be involved again and bring the depth of knowledge and content to that broadcast as well.
Oh yeah, well, we'd really obviously love to be back. It's been a really great time working with all of you guys, and it's been, fantastic for us. I think we've learned so much doing that, particularly working together as a pair and working with all of you guys. So it's been a really great experience.
Fabulous. Jota?
Yeah, I can't really echo it anymore. It seems so cliche to say. Everyone's like, oh, we got hooked on SSA, but we really did get hooked on SSA. don't be fooled. There were times off of broadcast, out during the week, where we were talking to each other and our friends about SSA because
Brilliant.
we were interested in what was going to be coming up next, and we have different theories. We spent a lot of time looking at the numbers, so it's easy to start getting a bit complacent and confident. You think, we've looked at it a ton, so we should know what's going on, and we still like to disagree a bit on it. It's still always someone shakes up the bag, and I'm assuming that after a long break, next split, there'll be a lot of shaking up happening.
Brilliant. Okay, guys. Well, that will wrap up this week's episode of 180 milliseconds too late, the SSA Rocket League podcast from myself, Greybeard, and our statisticians, Jota and Achunl. We are out. Peace.